Hey, I have a question for the folks that are in China. Is there a restriction for travel out of China to the U.S. in place from the U.S. and or is there also travel restrictions from the Chinese government? Is it both, or is it just one, or is it neither? Anybody know?
I think it's neither.
It's neither, so it's open travel now.
Uh, I think for the U.S. citizen, you have to apply for some kinds of like things to go to China right now.
Yeah, but
And
it's
then if a Chinese citizen, you have to get the travel permission first. Then if you staying in like if the past 14 days you staying in China, so you have to find another place to stay 14 days instead to come into
got got it. So if you came over, you'd have to quarantine for 14 days, basically,
in other countries that
in
allows.
another. Got
Yeah,
it. Oh, that's a pain. All right. Okay.
yeah.
So there's a whole nother step function in there. No, I ask. I'm trying to hire a guy for a position, and he's in China, and we're trying to figure out what options I have to get him into the country.
She has a green card or something, or just maybe
He has a
apply.
green card. He has a green card, but it's in process. Yeah, so it's
Oh,
messy.
okay.
Yeah,
If
it's messy.
if if he has the employment, like the work permission,
Yep,
and it's come with the permission to come back to US. So
got it.
basically, he has to find another country or place to stay in for 14 days to come back.
Got it. Got it. That seems messy. You got to
But it's
negotiate a
better.
deal with somebody else. Yeah.
But it's better than the international student right now because they don't even like allow to get the visas right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So they've killed it. Got it.
Yeah.
Painful. Super painful. Thanks. Thank you.
No problem.
We're close, guys. Not bad. 3 minutes passed. It's not the typical SciArc 10 minutes to get to quorum. Almost there. Did everybody get an assignment to me? I didn't check the roster. I didn't have enough time this afternoon. Did everybody get an assignment in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're missing 4 people. So I'll wait like 2 minutes and then we'll go. Today I just wanted to really I want to give you a second shot. I've seen some submissions that I'd say are incomplete and some submissions that are really pretty stellar. So I want to give everybody a chance to bring their project to stellar stance, at least on this first iteration. So that's first and foremost. So I want to review a couple projects, and I'll pick a few to review. It's a little painful trying to go through my email and find them, so I might ask or call out on you to take over and show your screen, and we'll talk about your project, and maybe that'll be most fair. And then after that, I wanted to just again review the 4 structural typologies. And then I want to cover one last one, which is really about lateral systems within structural systems. And the reason being is we got to ultimately cover seismic at some point. And it's important to have, the discussion of building lateral systems included in this conversation. Yeah. And lateral systems can sit in the vector space and they can sit in the shear space. And they also exhibit bending behavior. So not only are they surface active, they can also be bending. and they can also be vector active. So that adds a layer of complexity to the narrative. But I think important to understand and see those distinctions, and particularly now that you're in California and you go around and see buildings and building projects going up, and there's quite a bit of building construction ongoing coming out of the ground. So when you go driving around and you're seeing these buildings come out of the ground, try to imagine what the lateral system is based upon the conversation. So I think we have critical mass at the moment. I just want to, once before we start, does everybody have a submission in? If not, please submit. Now you've got a small window to do so. Okay. I I want to go over a couple. Well, I want to go over a handful of projects. And again, like I said, it's difficult to go through my email and just pick out of the group. So I'll ask uh, at some point. I'll ask or call on one of you or several of you to show your project, and we'll talk about it. And hopefully, we get a good start. Okay, so let me see if I can find some really good examples here. Um, yeah, this one's a pretty good one. Okay, share the screen. Um, let's go with this one. Do you see my screen? Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Allianz? Yeah. Okay. Whose project is this? Now that I've given up my screen, I can't circle back. Somebody raise their hand. Take responsibility.
Actually, I'm not sure if it is mine. I think
Does that look like yours?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is that no? Etta?
Yes?
Yep, that's yours? Yep. Okay.
No, it's not mine.
Not yours?
No.
I think maybe it's mine. Maybe when you can show the drawings. I'm not sure if someone else used the same project.
Is that yours?
Yeah, I think so.
Look familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is pretty good. So description of the project, some sections which help. Definition that it's a vector active structure. Absolutely. You can see the diagramming of the vector active truss, which is effectively a cantilevered truss, and the overturning. So this truss wants to. Let me see if I can get a pen to write, and I cannot. Of course, I cannot. Nope, it won't give me the pen. So you can see the truss. You can see that if I apply pressure on the tip, I'll get a moment here. It gets resolved by the triangulation, and then ultimately gets transferred into the base. What is really nice about this diagramming is the recognition that there is also a circular ring action happening. And see these yellow lines?
Greg, I can only see the photos, like the museum photos.
Yeah, we can't see the diagrams.
No.
We see the photos.
Can you see down in the lower piece? Can you see these?
No.
No, it's just like 5 photos of the museum, like professional photos.
Interesting. Huh. So you're not seeing the screen that says Allianz?
No, it says
No.
Jean Imperial Clean Museum and Materials Steel and PTFE.
Hey, hang on. Let me stop sharing. Let's try it again. Brutal. It might be because I have just too much stuff up. Can Can you see it now? Can you see?
Yeah.
Can you see, do you have Allianz?
Okay, this is mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got Allianz Arena. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Sorry about that. So, this is I think really well done. I was looking at this right before class. You know, description of the structure, uh, very clear from the written piece to the corner diagram that you've got a truss. You've got a cantilevered truss. You see the top chord in tension. Um, it wants to rotate around this pivot, yeah, which is effectively a ring beam that goes all the way around. And then the probably what's missing in this diagram is the continuation of the trussing on this back piece to get to this back cord that wraps around. Yeah, so that's probably a missing piece, but nonetheless, very clear in terms of how the loads transfer into the truss. What's also nice about this is the connection that there is circular behavior in this whole structural system, and that's represented in the yellow lines. And those rings effectively tie together. So if the tip of the truss were to deflect, and if the diagram was presented such that the tip would deflect, those hoops, the yellow lines, would effectively restrict the deflection. So it effectively tightens up the roof structure. And we'll talk about that when we get into the next section and talk about football stadiums, that the hooping action or the ring action is a really important phenomenon that effectively helps stiffen a roof. So if this was just a section like that's here in the middle, can you see my arrow? Yeah, my pointing arrow. That if it was just that section, the stiffness or flexibility of that roof would be much greater than what it is rendered as a complete ring. Yeah, so at the end they ended up with a much shallower structure. But the definition here is correct. It is a vector active structure. Yeah, so that I thought that was very good. There was another one that I wanted to show. Go ahead.
Please let Dagdir inside. He's
Yeah, hang on. I see him. There he goes.
Thank you.
Yep. Man, it does not like to pick up. It sure does not like to pick up. Give me a second. I gotta shut some stuff down here. Shut that down. Okay. The next one I want to show is this project. Can you see the? Can you see this project, which is this this canopy over ice? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We see that one.
Okay. And you know, what do you think the structure is?
Form active.
Yeah, it's got arches. It's form active. It also has a tensile fabric surface on the inside, right?
Oh yeah.
Which is pretty interesting. So let me see if I can close that. Did I shut this sketch down? So I forget the person that sent this. It came earlier, and who was the person that sent that?
Me.
Yeah. Okay. And these were the diagrams that were presented. I thought these were really good. So there's the steel ring, which is effectively the arches, yeah, and then in between is the cable net, right? And these the diagram, right, which shows the loads being applied and the deflected shape, etc., I thought described the overall structure extremely well. Yeah, I think the piece, I think the main piece that I would say is probably the text describing the overall is omitted, but the overall diagramming was really exceptional. Yeah. So here's the deflected shape. Here's clarity about the reactions, etc. So I thought that was a very very good example, and a great example of form active, and form active in two cases: one as arches, and two as a cable net that is effectively an anticlastic shape. Yeah. All right. So does anybody want to show their project, and it's the perfect opportunity to put your work up on display, and we can talk about it and see how on point or off point you are. Hopefully you're on point, but if not, if you're off point, this is a perfect time to catch it and be able to correct it, because I'm going to give you one more week to touch it up based upon the work I've showed. Anybody want to give it a shot, or do you want me to call on somebody?
I can show my first project, Greg, if it's possible.
Yeah, perfect. Fire away.
I don't know if it's very draft, but I cannot share screen from here. Only you can.
Only I can.
Oh,
Why is that? Why is that?
If you put in more in the three dots configuration, and then you have to allow the share screen button.
All participants. Perfect. Okay. There you go. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. I don't know why it's not showing. No. Oh. No, sorry. I don't know why it's not. The file is not. It's not in my folder. I should have to wait. Where? Can someone else go?
Yeah. Who wants to go? How about let's see. Let me pick on somebody. How about Catherine?
Okay, I'm warning you guys that these are really rough. And just give me a second to pull it up. I don't know, none of them are good examples. I'm just trying to find one that's here, we can just do the Pantheon, because that is a basic ass thing. As soon as I can share my screen. So this is, I was just looking at the Pantheon as a surface active, because it's a shell dome structure, one of the easier ones to kind of comprehend for me. And I think it's nice because the way the dome is created, obviously it gets thinner towards the top, and the different aggregate used in the concrete is also different towards the top. But in addition, they have these kind of stepped tension rings on the outside that are kind of like stairs, and then they do that because within the dome, you get tension forces towards the bottom while it compresses at the top, and so then the deflection would kind of smush it like a loaf of bread. And then since it is a surface active, if the deflection is too much or you have too many external forces, it would lose the curvature and you'd have a structural failure. So.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think my comment would be you did exactly what I warned not to do, which is don't draw small. Yeah. Because I think your explanation is actually spot on. It is absolutely 100% surface active. Your description of compression and tension in the zones is spot on. That yes, the forces build up right under gravity load as you work your way down the dome, right? As the rings, the loading is increasing incrementally, and so in a way you've captured all of the fundamental ideas of this, but your illustrations are so small, right? You're tentative, you're scared to do it, but you were 100% right. Yeah. And so I would encourage you to enlarge and be more confident with the sketching. Yeah, because it'll also, when it gets to more complex things, you'll become more comfortable in diagnosing what the structural system is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Um, okay. Austin, you wanna go?
Sure, I can go. Um, I don't know what project. I guess we'll just do.
Pick the one you're proud of, or the one that you think is right.
Well, I'm pretty sure this one's right. I don't know. We'll go with the binding key library. I mean, it's basically just kind of a giant box structure that sits on 4 piers. This kind of has like 4 perimeter beams at the top and bottom, and then these 2 kind of mega beams that like dip down in section that run across the middle. So it's really just like kind of all resting on these 4 piers, and then looking at the roof, these 2 large beams that go across the middle, and then like in section you can see they drop down, and like the tertiary beams sit on top of it. And then the facade's kind of made up of this like prefabricated like cruciform shape that had like pin connections that they just dropped and slid into place.
Yep. So there's a lot of things. This is a great project. You're 100% correct. Section active. I would say you have small sketch disease as well. Yeah. The niftiness of this is really, I'd say, twofold. One is, it's a table, right? It's got 4 supports, in the corner. It's got this big table framed system that effectively creates new terra firma, right? And terra firma is effectively new ground. So that's what lifts it off the ground. And then, the perimeter exoskeleton system is effectively these structural spars, which is your diagram 1.2. And it's cool that you caught the uniqueness of that's a pin connection. And if you remember, we talked a lot about the Vierendeel, and this is really kind of a Vierendeel truss. And what this is noting is, you have rigidity at the node where you get a vertical and a horizontal coming together, and that because of flexure, then you get zero moment at the pin, right? And that's the diagram. So you got there. You probably need that diagram, but you're spot on in capturing the core details of this building. Yeah. And you're of the era in which, architects were really only exploring section active, right? Mies van der Rohe, and then all of the folks that followed after Mies and the Bauhaus, because they were interested in industrialized processes. SOM, for example, which Gordon was a partner in. All of these guys, that was where their focus went to, was in industrialized processes and in components that could be built. And we talked about section active, how it wants to be beams and columns, etc. So no doubt that timing and history aligned there, and that there is this kind of consistency and an interest around section active structures. Yeah. So nice one. Okay, who else wants to give it a shot? I mean, the one thing I'd say is you're missing a narrative. Yeah. Remember, I'm all for hand sketches. I think SciArc is in desperate need of having lots of sketching, but I would also challenge you to work on your graphics and your presentation. Right, like this is a formal assignment. I would encourage you to see this as something that also would go in your portfolio. That you're doing case studies and doing evaluations, because when you get into practice, this is a big deal. Yeah. And I remember speaking to Dan Seibert, that who's a senior partner at Foster and Partners, him saying that that's a technique that very few architecture students have these days, is the ability to take projects and dissect them to understand what's going on. So I encourage you to have that in your portfolio going forward. And so be thinking about these deliverables as something you're going to package up. It's important to have your studio work, but it's also important to show that you own process, right? And you have rigor around your process to develop architecture. Okay. All right.
And I have my file already, Greg. Can I go?
Awesome. Yep. Fire away.
And I have a doubt regarding the systems. From how many stories does it become height active? I mean, it's after 4, after 5, or how's the criteria to categorize a building into height instead of section active?
So you'll always have some behavior that is fundamental as a big idea, and then height just figures in. Let's put it this way. If I were in Houston, Texas, where we don't have seismic, the lateral system generally does not make a bit of difference. Yes, you have to resist wind, and yes, those forces are relatively big, but you can generally bootstrap those things. Compare and contrast to somewhere like California, where seismic blows things up. So we're talking orders of magnitude different, right, in terms of force level. So Houston might see a hurricane, but even a hurricane is nothing to an earthquake. And where I'm going with that is height then matters, and height will matter in places like California because of seismic. In places where you don't have seismic, wind tends to govern, and it tends to happen at taller buildings. Yeah. So, really where's the line in the sand? Somewhere in the order of 5 stories. In a high seismic zone, height becomes to be an issue. In places where it's only wind driven, say New York, height becomes an issue, in the teens, in the middle to high teens. Yeah.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
No.
No.
Black screen. No.
Oh my God. Sorry. Again.
I can see your hand. Now I can see your screen.
Okay.
I can see your project to the lower right. Yep.
Okay. So I take, for example, the Sony Center as a cable structure.
Now you're black again.
I'm black again?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I don't know what's happening.
It disappears after you're done with the multitasking.
Yeah, I don't know why.
All right, we'll keep playing around with it. We're gonna go with. Well, there you're back.
Sorry, just the last one. So it's like the Sony Center. No, nope. It's not working, right? Okay.
No,
so,
it's not.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. How about we go with David Garcia?
Yeah. Give me a second. Let's see. I've definitely noticed that I probably don't have enough sketch or enough detail, I think.
That's okay. I mean, the point is, it's better to get blown up now than later, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I need know more on how these things work.
Awesome. Okay, what do you got here?
Yeah, so this
beautiful structure, by the way.
Yeah,
love
this one. Stadium, huge timber structure. This one is, of course, form active. and I
Yep.
kind of
Why? So normally a form active is a tensile structure. What makes this one unique? It's an arch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I kind of have some of the kind of details on it. It's kind of these major arches, and then aligned with these minor beams that go across it and plan.
Yep.
So I kind of try to show that the beam goes across to these anchor points and then forms like this egg form with compression inside and tension on the outside. I don't have.
So one of the things about arches, and the thing you always have to be really careful about is there's an enormous amount of force that comes out of these things because you're effectively collecting gravity forces and lateral forces, and these are getting translated effectively into compression, right? Into the curvature and transferring down through the arch, through the geometry, and each incremental step, that compressive force increases until it hits its support. So in your case, you're showing pinned, and that is correct. It's a pinned arch, which means at the end, you get a horizontal thrust and you get a vertical thrust, right? And so your foundation has to resist, has to push upward,
Okay.
and it has to push inboard, right? So it has to push from both sides inboard, right? And so lots of times in all cases, that results in very large foundations because you have very large thrust forces. And in this particular case, this is a very long span structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can become very, very costly. And later in the semester, I'll talk about a project I did with Shakura Bond, in which it's an art structure it's a surface. Let's just say it's a surface active structure, but the arching action, I also ended up with large thrust forces, and you can tie it. So in this particular case, if I actually took a cable and ran it under the field and I tied one foundation to the other, right? I could actually reduce my foundation requirements because I've tied the arch, right? Because my force coming out of the arch should be equal and opposite, right? So if I tie them, right, if they're pushing out, I tie them so that I pull them together, I have an equal opposing force, right? And so that tie, the tension could be really huge, but I basically have relieved myself of having to deal with the horizontal thrust of the arch. And now I'm only dealing with the gravity component. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody with me?
Yes.
That's a pretty cool narrative to understand. Okay. So I think again, you probably too suffer from tiny sketch. Yeah. You're missing, reactions. But I think it's a great structure, and I think you have good stuff here. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. How about we get, let's see. How about Jordan?
I only have like pictures of my sketchbook. Do you want me to share that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I definitely did not do as much as everyone up until this point. But for my section active, I did the Farnsworth House, the Glass House, and the Noe National Gallery by Mies and also Philip Johnson.
Yep. So let's just talk about the Farnsworth House, right? So you probably need the images of the Farnsworth house as part of your package. Going back to the conversation of the Bauhaus and industrialized construction, and particularly industrialization around common components, right? I-beams, etc. Almost all of the Mies van der Rohe work relies on a frame. So, here you're showing a frame, but you're really just showing the deflected beam in the center. And you need to pick up that the fact is in the frame, there's rigid corners, etc. Yeah. And that's a really important piece in your section AA. And then there's a logic of, effectively secondary structure that spans between those frames that pick that up. And that effectively presents itself as a secondary set of frames so that you've satisfied lateral resistance in both X and Y direction. And when I say X and Y, that's the plan dimensions. Yeah. Z being the vertical. Yeah.
Okay.
So those are the kind of pieces that you're missing there, but are fundamental to Mies van der Rohe. And there are, I don't know, there's probably a dozen or so books that are really, really good in articulating, the concepts around Mies van der Rohe. And he had some really, he's a great example, as I said, of an architect that was fascinated with section active structures because, industrialized components were just coming out post-war. And people had to figure out how to deliver projects in a very economical way. And ultimately it wasn't really economical. At the end, he ended up doing some very, very expensive architecture, but in that pursuit of trying to find ways to exploit industrialized components, he really created a beautiful aesthetic. Yeah. And, the work is absolutely spectacular in terms of its precision. And that can only be achieved through industrialized construction and industrialized processes. Yeah.
Sure.
So I encourage you to look at that. Again, get out of the small sketches and get to bigger diagrams and get the research into a document. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's see. How about Kate?
Sure. Okay. Okay, here's one that I have as form active. It's basically a glass structure that's held together by cables, and it's connected onto the existing building with the cables and on top of a tubular columns.
Yeah, this one's is an interesting one. It is, it's a barrel vault, and I would generally agree with you that it's form active, with the exception that if that plane of glass did not exist, right? So if you can blow up the plane of glass as a picture, you'll see that it's there's X bracing in there. See how it's crisscrossing? See that? See how there's X's in there? Okay. So really, at the end of the day, and this is where you and I are going to argue, and it'll be a good argument, there ultimately is a plane of action that's happening, and therefore it makes it surface active. But if you do have the diagram, so it is correct, the structure would fail because it literally is a bit too flat without the cable system underneath, which basically makes it a cable arch. Yeah. So there is a element of form activity in this thing, but if you only relied on form active, it would fail because you need the surface plane, and therefore it really is surface active. And the giveaway, sorry for my dog, the giveaway is the X brazing between the nodes that would make it surface active, right? Because it wants to be a shell, and that glass really is operating as a shell.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Beautiful project.
But this diagram is correct though. It's just
Yeah, the diagram is correct. You're effectively, so if you were to press on this thing, right? And just think about this. And these are really beautiful structures. So if I press on this thing, right? The whole thing wants to splay out, right? I get a thrust action out of the whole thing. But because of the cables, it prevents it from really flattening out, in a way that, and the best analogy is in a way like a bicycle wheel operates, if that makes sense, right? That's effectively what this is. It's not a complete bicycle wheel, but at the end of the day, because it's how laid out, it works exactly like a bicycle wheel, right? Like the spokes would never really like to be in compression, right? If you put the spokes in true compression, a bicycle wheel would fail. But because they're all in tension, the whole load, because it's in a ring, is always redistributing, so that the load, even though you're sitting on it and you're transferring a compressive force, right? You're trying to smash the wheel and the ground's trying to push back up at you. Because you have a ring of tension behavior, the deformation, that the spoke that is in compression can't be in compression because it doesn't have the capacity, and it redistributes through the system so that the spokes resisting tension actually carry the load. Does that make sense? Really, and that's effectively what you see here. Yeah. And in this section, if we just agreed that this was the section, I would agree with you that this would be form active.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the overall stability in the system really behaves out of the barrel arch, and that the form active really acts as a stiffening agent to what would be a very fragile barrel vault. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah.
Great. Wouldn't it become like a hybrid structure because of these like two elements working together?
Yeah, that's right.
Like, yeah,
100%, and that's why I said we could have a lot of fun arguing who's right. And in both cases, we would both be right. And based upon her diagram, if she just said that was the structure and what I was interested in, I would agree 100% right. It's form active. But the reality is, because this thing is actually operational as a barrel vault, it therefore is a shell. And I know it's a shell because I can see the Xing within the glass.
Yeah.
And so these are the really beautiful kind of conversations that you can have. And when you see this stuff, and you can see what this did to the architecture, this thing's such a light and sophisticated structure because of the understanding of what the structure could be, right? And that's where I'm trying to get you all. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Cool. Awesome. So I would say you probably need a couple more diagrams to pick up the surface active component of that. Yeah. But I really appreciate that project. Love those projects. Let's see. How about Jin? Oh, it says he doesn't have a camera, so that's not going to work. How about Carl? Carl Zong.
I have a question really quick. Sorry.
Yep.
So
far away.
Are all arches considered form, or?
Yeah. So the trick is, this. Like, for example, let's just pick a dumb one. The St. Louis Arch is a form active structure, right? And the reason being is it is only functional in the arching action in which it goes into full compression. Yeah. Therefore, it's a form active structure. Yeah. If, however, you took that arch and let's just say we did St. Louis Arch and we extruded it over, I don't know, a mile, that would be a section active structure. And the reason why it would be a section active structure is because ultimately at the end of the day, it has in that length, it has the potential to rack. And that racking, right, says that it will be not only in compression under load, but it'll also experience shear in plane, right? And that racking, we talked about racking in the plane of the material, that's shear. And any structure that has shear operational with the plane of the material is a surface active structure. And we talked about that as, deep beams, shells, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so kind of a similar but not the same. But like, so if a truss was an arch, that would still be considered.
So so you take the analogy of an extruded St. Louis arch and we flattened it out into a sheet and I trussed it out, it'd still be surface active. I vectorized it, so you could say it's a hybrid, yeah, but it would still be a surface active structure. Yeah. Yeah. And it really is the distinction. These are subtle distinctions, but they're big in the phenomenon. And it's no different than the argument about a beam, right? At some point, a beam becomes so deep, it becomes surface active. Yeah. And we talked about that, in the last class.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. All right. Fire away.
Okay. Let me share my screen. So I think I'm gonna use this example, the Toulouse Exhibition and Convention Center by OMA.
Yeah.
I think my project, I guess I'm too I don't put enough images on that, and I don't think I have enough diagrams to really explain everything well. But this one. So this project it's like it's like a series of buildings, and I'm choosing the convention center from the 3 buildings because it's very clear the truss is here. It's definitely vector active.
Yep.
And you can see in the image here, the truss is if you cut it by 2 different sides, you can see the different geometry of the trusses. But I forgot to add the the tensions there. So
yeah. There's really good documentation of this project being built. So I encourage you to get this. This is a 3-dimensional space truss. So if you go back to that interior shot, you'll see the 3-dimensional space truss. There's an inherent geometry to it. Yeah. There's also some niftiness in terms of the columns, right? Tree columns, and these 2 are vector active. Yeah. And you can see those in the background. So there's some really pretty cool stuff. There's also some unique conditions like at this front corner. So you can kind of see in the shadow lines, there's columns, which is the V column, that's kind of set back from the corner of the building. So does everybody see the corner of the building? And there's this kind of stadium seating that exists there. And part of the way by which Rem created this corner condition, so he didn't have a corner column, was he basically carried these trusses over the top of the V column, condition to create a column-free corner, So there's a
And
bunch of
it's
nifty active stuff in this building. And, REM is classic for using vector active structures. There's great examples of him building very tall buildings, or at least tall buildings, in which, he's stacking buildings and they're effectively column free on certain floors. And how's he doing that? Well, he's occupying the truss. So think of a truss as a full height, story high truss, or even multi-story high truss. And therefore he can eliminate columns or smartly place columns, at his whim, because he has these mega trusses going all over the building, to which, it provides him freedom architecturally to place columns. So I think for you, you can take a number of different positions on this project, but I think you really need the diagrams. And there's really great case studies of how he uses trusses to create architectural space. Obviously, in the main show space, right, the convention center space, that needs to be column free to support the exhibition requirements, right? So this is mega architecture. And how does he do that? He does that with this space truss. When he wants to control architecturally where he has to place columns, he's using these mega trusses like he does in these corners to effectively allow him to move a column off corner and move it inboard down the face of the building. And so he creates this really pretty cool architectural condition at the corner that is effectively column free.
and
Cool.
I think the three different buildings in this project, I think it's all vector active, but it's different.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Yep,
that's
agreed.
also. I think it's also interesting to see how he employs different strategies, but like the
Yep.
same kind of strategies in this whole very huge project.
Yep. So you need a lot of sketch. You need the diagrams, to back
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
You have the right
Oh.
project. You just need to do the work. Yeah.
Okay, I'll work.
Yep.
I'll work
Yep.
on that.
All right. Who else wants to go? I don't want to call on people, but somebody go. These are all great examples, and I think they're helpful to talk about, because in talking about them, hopefully it helps you better think about how you're going to use words to describe your structures and how you're diagramming. Who wants to go next? Christy, you want to go? Christy, you? Nobody really wants to go.
Hi.
Stephanie, did you say something? Did you?
Can you see my screen?
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah, so this one, from like the Exxon view, you can say this one's like form active because it has the two arches, but I choose this section, which I would call that is a vector active. So basically, it just creates a big cantilever entrance. So it supports its main idea, have the edge of the city and the library together, and it also minimize the supporting under these arches, which leaves the facade of the entrance is mostly glazing and open. But I had trouble thinking about how the deformation would look like, since from the BB section, you can see here is the arches and there's like the cantilever on the top of that, but seems like
Yep.
here.
Yeah, so this is an awesome project, and you'll find that more often than not, projects today no longer have the kind of purity of when Mies van der Rohe was practicing, etc. It's people are interested in way more complex ideas, and therefore it tends to require multiple structural concepts. So you're spot on. This is a really helpful diagram. I know it's not yours, but it's a great starting point. I always encourage people to start with projects that are well diagrammed, because it begins to help you understand how a project goes. So, what's the big idea here is really they needed to create new terra firma, right? They needed to create a new elevation that allowed the building to have a new ground. Yeah, and that's what they did. But they also had a limited number of points to which they could touch ground, right? And in lieu of just sticking props, where you needed props, they really wanted a long span condition, and that's where they inserted these red arches. And the arches effectively pick up transverse spanning trusses, yeah? And by changing the geometry of the truss, the transverse truss coming across the arches, they could pick up the building, and therefore they could have a very organic architectural form for the project. Yeah. So from a deflection point of view, the arch is going to deflect just like an arch, right? It's going to want to deform in that way. It's going to carry load the exact same way that an arch fundamentally carries it. The cantilever section, which is probably the more complex bit in here, is the cantilever comes up and through, and so those effectively are your points of support. So if you're going to diagram your cantilever, and you've effectively done that here. You have your two blue arrows; those are your arches coming up through the building, picking up these trusses. Yeah, and the image there is effectively very much a OMA kind of move of occupying the diagonals within a truss. Yeah, that's what they're doing, and using that space in a very smart way. Okay, so but let's look at the diagram once more. So in that diagram, you can clearly see that they're only doing the trussing where they need trussing, right? So where that cantilever needs to span over the arch, you see trussing, and then the trussing no longer exists as it works towards the back, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting point. The other thing is you see the yellow columns coming down, and you see how they made sure that the diagonals directly correspond to a node, so that the column is always sitting on top of a node. And we talked about that. That's an important feature that we always want to hit. We always want to hit a node. Yeah. So there's some really good things to explore. So go down to your diagrams. Yeah, I think what in your cantilevered section, I think what's wrong here is your point of support actually has to hit where that last diagonal is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not on the back side of the building. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
So yeah. But yeah, this is a really interesting building. I think in your plan, in your upper left hand diagram, what you're missing in that, you've laid out effectively what your truss lines are. What's missing is you need to show where the arch comes up through, and the arch is supplementing the fact you do not have columns, right? That in other words, where the arch is actually supporting the truss, it effectively behaves as the support. Like if there were a column there, it's behaving as the column. It's the rigid point of support for that truss. Now it'll have flexibility relative to a true column, but that's the point. Is I don't want to have columns there, so I'm going to drive I'm going to drive an arch through the building and effectively eliminate those columns. Is what's going on.
Okay.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Who else wants to go?
Hi, it's more of a question. I
Yep.
want ask. There's a building I thought it's section active, but I'm not really sure if it is not.
Do you want to share your screen and let's see it?
Oh, yeah, I know like it's really like sketchy looking at other people's works, and yeah, I just really need to spend more time on the diagrams and the descriptions.
Yeah.
This is the building invasion, the water cube.
Yeah.
And I thought it's section active because like the general form of it is really linear, but then like it's also like the structure going through them is like very it's hexagonal, so I was kind of wondering if it is.
Okay, so well done. It is section active. The reason why it's section active, even though it wants to look and feels like it should be vector active, like it wants to be a space frame, it is a space frame, but it truly has frame action. In other words, because it's not triangulated, all of the elements are experiencing bending. Yeah.
Bending.
Yeah. So because it's seeing bending, it therefore has to be section active. Yeah. And so all of those nodes, well, not all the nodes, but generally speaking, the nodes don't resolve themselves into 3 points, right? That you couldn't arrive at 0, and therefore I get bending, right? I get rigidity at a node, right? The spatial aspect, right? The fact that there's dimensionality to it is a way that it prevents the structure from buckling. In other words, if I have some depth in there, basically I have multiple load paths, and that second layer or multiple layers of structure within that effectively stiffen up the structure. Yeah. But you're spot on that it is section active. Most people, I've had it almost every year as a project, and people want to make it vector active because it looks so much like a space truss. It's not trussed out. Yeah, the geometry is not a truss.
So the space truss must be like 3 points, but no more.
It must be able to triangulate, and in this case, you do not have triangulation. So therefore, you can't get to a place where effectively the node is a pin, right? So a vector active structure, if it's a planar truss or a shell or what have you, if it's triangulated, therefore the pin or the node can be a pin and will never see moment. In a frame or a section active structure, the node has to be rigid because it will see bending. Yeah, and that's the key. So when you're looking for vector active structures, you're always looking for the resolution of the geometry in 3 directions.
3 directions.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Who else wants to go?
I actually just have a question about Casamila, and sorry, I don't know why my mute cut out. My mic cut out. I'm curious about the roof, the attic in Casamila, because it has the catenary curves in the arches, but then it's kind of extruded along to create almost a barrel vault. But because the arches are all and varying heights, it would still be a form active project, correct?
Do you have a picture?
Not a very good one. Just give me a second. Oh, maybe I don't. Okay.
Just want to make sure everybody's following along.
So like all of them, like it almost looks like a snake skeleton. So like all of these are like all different heights, and they're catenary curves, and so it's mainly like it arches, and it has these kind of buttresses next to it. But then like I guess internally it almost seems like it could be a barrel vault, but this is just a form. I just want to double check that this is form active.
What's the class think? Anybody? What do you think? Nobody wants to guess.
Maybe it's surface.
Surface, yeah, that's the way I was thinking also.
So in this particular case, because it's it's basically you see a spine at the top and then these repeating arches of different sizes. The fact that I said arch should tell you its form. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to double check because the barrel vault gets kind of confusing to me, or like where it. Yeah.
So this is very similar to the stadium we saw earlier, in which the arch is the principal behavior, and then the spines, if you will, which is at the crown of the arch, effectively ties them all together, right, to complete the structure. Yeah. So each one is effectively leaning on the next, but I could effectively have that leaning element. I could pin that and it would be stable. Yeah. Because the arch effectively is stable.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. Let's do one more, and then I want to re-emphasize a few things, and then I want to talk about height systems, and then we'll be done for tonight. Who hasn't gone that wants to go, or has a project that they're super anxious about, that is terrified to show but probably should? Anybody?
May I share something?
Yep.
Let me share my screen.
Okay.
So I have the Santa Catarina market in Barcelona, Spain.
Yep.
And for me, I think it is mostly surface active. But if you see from the section, there's something interesting because it has like a huge truss arch supporting it.
Yep.
So I think the
what is it? Yeah. What is it? Yeah.
Sorry. I think its function is that usually for the surface active part, it's kind of folded, and then at each fold you should have a column supporting it. But then this arch allows it to be suspended from the top instead of supported from the bottom, so you can have a larger span at the interior. That's what I'm guessing.
Okay. Well, the arch is effectively form active that's been vectorized, right? So that's that main arch. This is a great project, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Let's see. Can you go back to the front elevation? Yeah, go one of those. Yeah, bingo. Okay. So, all right. So the giveaway. Let's take a look at the upper right hand corner picture. You see supports, right? So you see the supports at the low point of effectively the vaulted roof, right? So so you see structure coming up, and then it picks up a truss, yeah? And you see that truss effectively flying over the top, and that runs continuous, and those trusses follow the valleys, right? Agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. On top of those trusses, you see heavy lines which rise up from the truss, follow the geometry, and come around to the other side, which is effectively a vault, right? Yep, you've got it. That's an arch, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to argue that this thing really is form active, and the stability between the arches is effectively the purlins, which are the ruled lines that you see on the underside of that surface. And the kind of the folded piece of paper that is this colorized tiled surface really is nothing more than cladding.
I see.
Okay, so that is the principal behavior of this thing. Now let's let's take a look at the picture to the left of this image, and you see 3 trusses. You see those 3 trusses? Can you kind of point to them? Okay. All right. Now let's go to your section, or the diagram section that you had from your research. There you go. Okay. So those 3 trusses are spanning from 2 main points of support, and they are those black looking T's. Yeah. See that?
Mm-hmm.
So those arches are flying completely across this space. Now, there's something unique happening, and off of those main trusses, you see vertical lines that drop from the truss, and yep, right there, and also there, and on the other side, they're picking up the low point, and so at the low point of an arch, I've got to pick that up. I really need a column there, but in this case, they can't support a column, or a column doesn't work with the architecture. So what did they do? They got rid of the column, and they effectively hung that point from above by a hanger. And that's what those vertical lines are. And they're effectively picking up the folded roof and attaching it to the big truss, yeah? And then the big black dark line that's running horizontal left to right, effectively tying both T's, that is a tension cable that basically ties that arch. So remember, that arch wants to thrust out, but they don't want to have a big foundation internal to this building, right? So they only really want to take out the vertical component. So how do you get rid of the horizontal thrust? We talked about it earlier. You tie it, and that's what they've done, is they've tied that to take out the thrust, and effectively that means that they only have to deal with the gravity component in the vertical. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is a pretty cool project, because it's a whole series of arches running and spanning between trusses, but those trusses can't always be supported, and so at the end, they had to insert these big mega arches to span over, and these mega arches then effectively pick up those locations where they couldn't have columns supporting the trusses running front to back. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So does that mean as long as there is arch, it is form active?
That's right. And the key is you're looking for the elements. Now. Something unique could have happened. I could have eliminated the steel. So this is a steel frame structure. I could have eliminated the steel and cast it in concrete. And if it was formed in concrete and it was a continuous extrusion of concrete, what would be the structure?
It would be a surface active?
That's right, because it's a shell.
Yeah, okay.
So it matters a great deal what you compose the system of. So if it's composed of sticks and it has form, it's probably arch, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? That's not to say that if I triangulate it, right, I could be a surface active structure and I could triangulate it and I could turn that into a vector active system, yeah? But in this particular case, because I gave it a formal property, I've given it an arch, it's form active.
Okay. I see.
Cool? Okay. All right, so I think that's enough reviewing projects. Unless anybody else wants to show their project, I really want to close on this note. I would say there's some good work, there's some good thought, there's some work that is, not complete, certainly would not receive a positive grade at this moment in time. I think we've talked about it in a way that you should be able and capable to document your work now. So, next week your assignment will be due. I'll use these assignments that were submitted to effectively document your attendance of class today. So consider that a quiz. Yeah, you attended. If you submitted a project, you will get some points. So that's a positive. And you get an extra week to really fine tune your project. And again, remember, we're at a design school and the work should reflect the quality and sophistication of a design school, right? So let's talk once more about the things you're looking for. So if it's section active, the principal behavior is it's bending, right? Bending. And the giveaway is elements will have dimension to it, right? There will be sizable dimension to an element experiencing bending. And the reason being is to resist bending, you need structural depth. You need structural depth within the section, okay? And that's how you know you have a section active structure. If it's vector active, you will always see triangulation because you always will have pin connected nodes, right? Sum of the force at the node is 0, right? And it'll be pin connected. And that means that your elements will be relatively small. It'll be a filigree of components. But the big driver in all of that is it'll be triangulated. So that's vector active. Form active will always be in tension. It will always have a funicular shape or a catenary shape. It wants to find a path to stability. If it's just a hung cable, it's not a stable system because under a different loading condition, it will deform greatly and it will lose stability. And that's not great for structures. Yeah. So we are always looking for a secondary structure or a secondary geometry to give it stability. And that could be a cable truss. So an opposing curvature, right? So if one is a curve down, we look for a curve in the opposite direction. It could be curvature in 2 directions of that form, you know, and we classified that as anticlastic, yeah. But those are the key features of form active. The novelty in all of that is the singular instance of an arch, right? Which is the outlayer, but the arch experiences effectively pure compression. It will experience some bending because it's a rigid structure, but at the end of the day, the principal phenomenon is compression, and the structure is sized for compression, right? As you work down the arch, the section of the arch gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it's resisting more and more force. Finally, surface active is always a shell action, and it will have two-way curvature. Even in the barrel vault, there's 2 directions of curvature. Yeah, there's the extruded direction, and then there's the arching direction. So two pronounced directions. And the key piece is you're experiencing shear, right? That within the plane of material, it wants to rack and or the material is resisting that racking. Yeah. So those are important narratives or understandings to have. And if you can get that down and, you know, really fixed in your head, then everything going forward should be pretty straightforward. Okay? Questions on that?
I have a question. Can we send our sketches and diagrams to you during this week, like we did last week?
Yeah, people sent stuff to me during the week. I was slow to respond. I apologize. I had to make a last minute trip to Sacramento, but I did respond, and so I'm happy to do that. Please do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Let's see. I wanted to talk about give me a minute here. I want to talk about something unique that came up in correspondence with a student. And let's see. Give me a minute. super frustrating to find these images. So I'm going to do two of them. I want to do two pictures. Let's see what the question was. Okay, so first one was a question asked by a student, and it was about, what was that sketch, about this project. And this was really talking about British Museum. And the question was, couldn't this be form active? Yeah. And it could be if it did not rely on the surface for stability, right? And at the end of the day, that axon image in the middle is important. So AA, yes, that's an arch. But because of the overall behavior, the dashed line that actually completes the circle effectively holds that all together. It braces all the arches at the top, but two, at the bottom, at the base, that ring effectively restricts and as we talked about previously, Brunelleschi in his chain in the dome, that chain is the belt that ties all sides together and restricts the surface or the vaulted surface from splaying out, right? And when I say splay out, if I look at that section AA, because there is no hard reaction, right? There's not an ability to resist that horizontal thrust. The thrust is resolved within the surface, yeah? Whereas if it were an arch, I would either have to tie it, there'd be a cable coming across connecting the two dots, or I'd have to have a really big-ass piece of foundation or support to pick it up. Neither of which I have. I just have the surface. And because of that ring, the belt action at the top and at the base, right, at the point, that ties this whole thing really together. The unique thing, and I talked about it at the corners, because you have a breach, right, the geometry doesn't really happen in a circle. The pinching of that really creates kind of a folded condition along this line, and it locks in the geometry. So it actually does complete the belt or the hooping action. So that was a question somebody asked, and I'd go back and check the name, but no point. The person that asked, does that answer your question, or? Go ahead.
Can I ask something about the structure?
Yep.
Like the dashed line, is it the peak point of the arch, or is it an actual structural element that rings?
It's the peak point of the arch that I'm rendering. But at the end of the day, because the surface is all triangulated together, you can find these continuous hoops that go all the way around, right? That complete the geometry, right? And because it's all triangulated, even though it has kinks in that path, the triangulation prevents the kinks from coming out of the line. Yeah. So if you actually tried to trace a hoop all the way around, you'd end up with these segments that are following the triangulation, right? You could cut a path all the way around and complete a ring. If it were intention, which we know it would be at the lower extremes, that tension would want to pull that line straight, so it wouldn't allow the kinks. but because it's all triangulated within the surface, that it can't be pulled straight, right? And so at the end, we can only abstract the idea that at the lower geometry, right? So at the inside ring, you get hooping action, and then on the outside, nearest the perimeter, you get hooping action, right? You get a tension, and this belt pulls the whole damn thing together and prevents the surface from wanting to pull apart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. I wanted to do one more.
Can I ask
Do one more, which is this one. Okay, so give me a minute. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so this is Yale, and the question is everybody familiar with the Yale Art Museum? It's got this really beautiful cast in place slab structure, and you're looking at the underside of slab. I guess I could see if I have a picture of it. Let's see if I can find a picture of that. Give me a second. It would be awesome to see that. Yale Art Museum. Images. Bingo. Okay. So let me share. Tell you what, my hand hurts from chasing the share button. Okay, can everybody see the pictures?
Yeah.
Okay, so really beautiful, right? This is a slab, and it's a long span slab system. The question was, because this is triangulated geometry, at least what you're seeing in that plane is triangulated geometry, is this a vector active structure? And the answer is, it depends on what you're trying to evaluate. If we were evaluating a diaphragm, yes, it would be a vector active system, but we're not looking at the diaphragm. We're actually looking at the gravity system and the slab system specifically. And in that case, it is all about depth, and there's depth here, and therefore it has to be a section active structure. What makes this a long span system and what makes it very effective is the triangulation enables the load path to always adjust to the shortest span direction. So, you know, the long length, the long chord length, so this is a long chord length there, that clearly is not going to carry the load. The structure is always going to find the path, the shortest path to unload the load. Why? Because the shortest distance is always going to be the stiffest, right? And so it's going to track that load. And so this really became, was really a good conversation piece, because at the end of the day, yes, I see triangulation, but is it truly vector active? And the answer is no. Questions?
No, quite clear.
It's a really beautiful structure, and you know, we don't do stuff like that right now, but you know, in the future, particularly with you know, a lot more automation in construction, a lot more you know, robotics and fabrication, I could see a whole world of new architecture that can emerge from that. So for those that really enjoy the digital space, that's a hell of an opportunity to come back and re-explore some of these things that we don't do presently because of labor. In the future, labor won't be the issue, because more and more industrialized mechanization will happen, and it will create new opportunities for this kind of stuff to happen.
But that also happens with Candela's structures, right? Because they were like a lot of wood to cast the concrete, and
yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's fair to say today that with CNC processes, right, like digital design and CNC processes, I can mill the formwork and take out the complexity. It used to be when Cadella did a shell, they'd have to take 4x8 sheets of plywood and lay that out, and get it to fit, right? And we talked about it's impossible to take a rectilinear material and shove it on a surface without customizing the patterning, right? That's grossly labor intense, which is why that kind of complexity went away, because labor became more and more expensive. And today, labor is a principal driver in all projects. Labor is super expensive, and going forward, we've got to find ways to implement technology to bring down the cost of construction, and particularly digital processes and CNC, capabilities will allow us to explore more efficient ways to make buildings. Yeah, and certainly explore more ideas around surface active structures, form active structures, vector active structures. Okay. All right. So again, I talked about that. I talked about that floor as a diaphragm, and that being a vector active diaphragm structure. So what do I mean by a diaphragm? What do I mean by a diaphragm? Does anybody know? Okay, so think of it this way. When wind or seismic is applied, and I'm going to pick wind because seismic is the reverse. Let's just take wind, right? So a facade system, so a building facade, the face of the building, the elevation of a building, wind is applied. Wind is blowing on that face, right? And that facade is spanning vertically between floor plates, right? We agree? Okay, so I get a reaction, that horizontal reaction, that is going to get loaded into the slab edge. Yeah? Does it make sense?
yeah.
Okay. So let me take the analogy of a shear wall building. I'm going to have shear walls on both ends of the building. Let's say there's a shear wall. It's a four-sided building in plan. I have a shear wall on each side. Yeah. Okay. Wind blows, right? Wind blows on, let's call it face A. It's a symmetric building. It's a square in plan. Shear walls on four side. Wind blows on side A. And this building has side A, side B, side C, and side D, right? So wind is applied. That facade on each floor level, wind is applied and gets redistributed through bending of the facade elements into the slab edge, right? I now have load going into the slab edge, right? That load has to then travel and track through that slab and get to my perimeter shear walls that are in the opposing direction, right? So these are the walls that are in the transverse facades of the building, right? So I'm talking about this facade, wind's blowing, my side walls, my lateral elements exist, right? Because I'm trying to resist in this direction. Does that make sense? Wish I had a piece of paper to draw on this thing. Tell you what, this is when you get inventive, Nobody will ever accuse me of not being inventive. Okay, so I have a plan. I have a building. There's my floors. Wind is applied. This is my facade. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Uh-huh.
See if I can find my own picture so I can make sure I'm showing. Okay. All right. So here's my building. Here's wind being applied. This is my typical floor, and this is the facade that's spanning between floor plates. Got it? You with me? Some head nods, please. Yes. Okay. Down here in plan, here's my plan. I'm going to put some very thick shear walls on 4 sides.
Greg, what does shear wall stand for? What's like the meaning of shear wall?
Just say a thick concrete wall, right?
Okay.
So a wall, a structural bay wide, full height of the building.
Like this.
Yeah. So I've laid it out. You see my 4 shear walls? Boom, 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 and boom. Okay. My wind in this case. So I have my section of my building here. I have my plan here. Yeah. Wind is blowing. That's my wind blowing on the building, right? And so that means I've got, in addition to this loading, I also have this loading, right? On that slab edge, right? Because this facade piece, which is this element, this facade piece here, which is this element there, right? I'm only blowing it up, right? Wind is applied, and it supplies load to my slab edge, and that's my slab edge and slab edge, right? And so I'm saying I'm going to take this slab edge, this lower slab edge, and I'm going to equate it there. Got it? So we're drawing load paths. You with me? Okay. All right. So that element, this slab, operating as a diaphragm between that element and that element, is effectively a beam. And when I say diaphragm, at least within the world of lateral systems, that is bending within the diaphragm, within the slab, in plane direction. So think of it this way. I'm actually talking about bending, right? And I drew a bending diagram. I'm talking about bending in that plane. In other words, if I would really distort this thing under wind load, this slab would do that. See how I drew the dashed lines? Wind would distort it. Why would it distort it? Well, because I have 2 very stiff shear walls here and here. And so my slab would deflect, and you see the dashed line, it's deflecting. And so at the end of the day, that slab is really operating as a simply supported beam in plane, right? In the horizontal plane. That's a really important piece to understand how lateral systems work. And, you know, when we talk about seismic, it'll reverse, because remember, the dirt moves, not the building, right? The building is simply responding to the building moving, or to the dirt moving. In this case, the building is moving because wind is pushing the building and the dirt is staying put, right? All right. So my shear wall, which are my lateral elements, are super stiff, and my diaphragm effectively is bending between these 2 points. In this case, you might say, well, why the hell does this shear wall participate? Well, because it's long and slender. It has no stiffness in this direction. Its stiffness is in this line, right? It's in this direction, not this direction, not horizontal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have a question. So if the wind, say, was, instead of coming from the left-hand side, if it was coming from either the top or bottom, the diaphragm wall and the shears wall would still be reversed, because all 4 walls in this situation are equivalent, correct? So then the top and bottom could act as a diaphragm wall for the other 2 shear walls. Okay, perfect.
Okay, so let me blow on this thing from the other side. Okay, I blew on it from the other side. Yeah, so wind, and this is no more than a line load, because I track the line load from my understanding of the facade, and I get reactions, right? Like a plane of facade, 1-story height of facade is like simply supported between slab edges, right? My ceiling and my floor, that facade is spanning between the 2, right? So I get reactions out of top and bottom. I'm only talking about the reaction in this case at the bottom. Wind is now applied at the top edge here, right? And so now this diaphragm is spanning between this shear wall and that shear wall. And my deflected shape looks like that. You see it?
Yes.
Make sense? That's a super hard conversation, and I can tell you most practicing architects don't understand that. But that is effectively the definition of a diaphragm, and particularly in seismic regions like California, China, Japan, engineers are very precious about that diaphragm because that load path back to those lateral elements is everything. Now, these shear walls could also be moment frames. These shear walls could also be braces, could be a K brace, could be an X brace, etc. Right? There's a whole inventory of lateral resisting elements that we can talk about that could exist at those locations. But the point here is we want to talk about the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is effectively the floor, and we're talking about the floor spanning between lateral force resisting elements. Okay? And so when we're talking about, high-rise buildings, like super tall buildings, we're always talking about the lateral force resisting system. Same way when we're talking about buildings in California, we talk about the lateral force resisting system, yeah? In California, we tend to always be seismic dominant, although when we get very tall, we ultimately become wind, even in California. Everywhere else will be wind dependent, okay? Questions? Good on that? Okay.
So, sorry, this only applies with wind and seismic. It has nothing to do with gravity. Great.
That's right. That's right. Because these are horizontally applied loads to the structure, and that's why you don't often hear about it. But when you go out and practice, I'm going to tell you almost every flipping conversation you'll ever have with plan check and the structural engineer will be about the flipping diaphragm, because it's how the forces track back to the lateral force resisting elements. So I'll use wind in this particular case, but we're also going to get to seismic and it'll reverse on you. So I just need you to understand wind, and then I'll say it's going to change because, in the one case under wind, the building is moving, the dirt's staying still. In a seismic event, building staying still, dirt's moving, right? I mean, it messes with your head, but that's the fundamental principles, yeah? So super important. Okay. All right, I promise we're going to get out of here in 15 minutes. I want to show you, I want to talk about, and we probably will do another session on this, because I think talking about structures and their lateral system is really important, particularly as we move into the seismic part of it. Okay, so here, so the conversation talked about height, and in the Heino Engel book, there is a section on effectively height active structures. Even if you were doing a residential house in California, people still talk about shear panels. The shear panel is effectively the plywood on your house. Yeah. In taller structures, you might see steel moment frames, and oftentimes you'll see some steel framing around windows, or oftentimes there'll be a Simpson strong tie shear panel, which will be bent metal, and it operates as a shear panel. Sometimes you'll see trussing. So again, the giveaway is triangulation. But the point is, you'll need a lateral system in a building to make it stable. If you don't have a lateral system, so to resist horizontal loading, the building will effectively flop over in the wind. Okay, so there's a variety of different ways in which you can look at lateral systems, and I will encourage you to look at the Heino Engel book. I'm not going to belabor it here, but what's important here is here's a section active frame system, that stacks up, and basically at the end of the day, this is just combinations of moment frames. And on this case, you have moment frames operational on the face of the building and as you go through the building in its entirely. So there's moment frames that run transverse in both directions through the plan of the building. Could I do a building that just had simply supported beams, columns on the interior and moment frames on the exterior? Absolutely, yeah. It's really what you want to express. So if it's frame active or section active and they're frames on the exterior, remember we have bending in the sections and therefore you have some dimensional shape to those elements. And so as an architect, you might consider, well, geez, I don't want a moment frame on the exterior because I don't want to see the expression of chunky structure out there. I would rather have it on the interior and therefore I'll bring it through. Conversely, you may say, well, you know, I want exposed soffit. I want to see the underside of structure. I need to get MEP in there and I want to pack as many floors as possible. And then in that case, you would say, well, I'll put the moment frame on the perimeter and I'll do simply supported beams in columns on the interior because I can minimize my depths and my sizes of structure to accommodate the layout of structure. Okay, does that make sense? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The next one over is effectively, you see X bracing on the perimeter. So this is vectorized. These are vectorized brace systems. And when we talk about lateral bracing or a brace system, you know, we have K braces and various other geometric configurations that accommodate that. But the principal phenomenon there is to get the triangulated geometry. There's some unique technology that we have incorporated into that geometry in which we do allow the beams to deform so we can gobble up energy or absorb energy. And we'll talk about that later in the seismic piece. But the point is, sometimes it's okay to have a structure deform and to absorb that energy. And it's interesting, and you can do this when you go, when you have some time. Take a paper clip and just keep bending it, right? Keep deforming it, keep deforming it. When it finally breaks, put your finger at the point where it breaks. It'll be hot, yeah? Basically, that structure has absorbed energy. And if you can control where you absorb energy, then you probably can preserve and maintain a high level of life safety within a structure. And so we do that as structural engineers, yeah? Okay, next one over is effectively a shear core building. And all I'm saying is it's an extruded shape up through the building, yeah? On the next one, which is the first one, second row down, you know, basically it's a triangulated exoskeleton system, and it's basically using the slab plus diagonals to create that. Next one over, again, is an exoskeleton system, operational. Next one is, I always call these a house of cards, but effectively the lateral system is effectively a series of vertically aligned shear walls and then transverse shear walls on the interior. So you see a lot of this in hotels and you know, six-pack apartments and the like, a lot of multifamily. Here again is another look at that kind of system. And then you can take these ideas and you can extrude them up. So, you know, if it works for 5, it'll work for 20. There are height constraints, right? Obviously, the taller you get, efficiency drops. And so super tall buildings around the world, you tend to see core systems with outriggers. So in other words, they reach out, and we'll talk about those kinds of systems in primarily wind resistant systems. I'll show you some examples of that. And then a lot of times you'll see exoskeleton systems. Why do you see exoskeleton systems, particularly with high rise? Well, because it puts the structure at the perimeter, right? And you get real efficiency there. And if I can triangulate it, right, I can really lean down those elements. It's hard to get triangulation to work throughout the building space, so putting it on the perimeter makes a lot of sense. You know, here the next one over is perimeter bracing, X bracing in this particular case, but again, you could have other geometry. The key is it's triangulated. So moment frame, exoskeleton, braces, and then here is shear panels, perimeter shear panels. You don't see these so often because they're not very efficient. Most often, and so when you're driving around LA, most of the buildings being built that are high rise here, we do a center core shear wall, which is a 4-sided shape or a 3-sided shape. And the reason why we do that is if you could think about torsion, in plan, the building under a seismic event will tend to want to twist. There's always some level of twisting there. And if you can do a closed shape or at least a C shape, you have some torsional resistance. A single plane of material, right, there's nothing to resist twisting, right? But if I have a shape, I can't, it can't twist. And that's why we do it. So on that note, I wanted to roll out of the discussion of the diaphragm and at least get to, you know, what are lateral systems, and this was really a conversation of trying to identify that. We'll spend the next class talking specifically about the classification of lateral systems, and I'll talk about wind-driven systems and seismic-driven systems. I'll diagram that up, and then I will introduce the concept of very long span structures, and I'll specifically cover the topic of you know, mostly stadiums and arenas, and we'll talk about those kinds of building topologies. So it'll be kind of a two-step process in that class to get us motoring forward, and I would say we're at that point we're nearly caught up to where I wanted to be with the class. Okay. Any questions on what I talked about? We'll go back over this, you know, the next class. But I wanted to at least introduce these concepts. Yeah. Questions?
With the diaphragm, you the scenario that you brought up was 4 shear walls at 2 opposite ends. What are the cases if there was only on 2 sides? Or like, is that a case where it would be like that?
It would be, so you couldn't do a case where it's only on 2 sides because you wouldn't have a lateral system in the other direction. Okay, so that wouldn't be possible. But let's take the case of so that is a center core shear wall, right? So I'm in plan, right? And we all agreed that we understand how wind gets applied from a facade point of view, right? We all agreed that. Okay, so slab edge is loaded. Slab edge is loaded, right? Agreed? Okay, so now in this particular case, my slab is going to deflect as a set of cantilevers. See how I drew those lines? Yeah. The edges are not supported. The center is rigid because my rigid structure, the resisting elements, are the walls that are running in the opposing direction of the wind, right? And the slab is effectively spanning up and over that core, right? And so effectively the edge actually wants to deform, right? And that's what that diagram is showing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Basically, your lateral element is the stiff point. It's operating like a gravity system. It's operating as the column, right? That's the way to think about it. Your lateral system in the horizontal is like your column, and then the slab is spanning between your lateral system, or effectively your columns. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Is everybody on board? Does that make sense? I mean, these are complex principles. They're when you get them, they're super simple. But I'm telling you, most practitioners don't understand this, and these become the difficult challenges, particularly when you're taking the exam, the licensing exam, when you're trying to decipher what the hell they're talking about. If you don't understand how loads get transferred to the ladder elements, it's nearly impossible to calculate and or decipher the logics that are inherent in the systems. Yeah.
Greg, I have a question.
Yep.
Like, I made this diagram. I'm not sure if you can see. So this is a shear wall. So does the deflection, does the size of the shear wall or the position of it determine the deflation?
It does.
Like on the three sides there are columns, and only on one side is a shear wall.
So let me diagram. That's an awesome one. So your diagram, and it won't be perfect to yours, but let's just play this out. So I will only do these are great questions, guys, and I think it's super helpful. And like I said, super helpful to know it now and get it and have somebody explain it. So there's your structure, right? And I'm going to assume your columns are not intended to be part of a moment frame, right? They're not rigidly connected above, and therefore they have no stiffness. It's only this line, right? So the deflected shape of this thing is going to look like, and I'm going to really exaggerate it. So if the wind is applied, there you go. Wind's applied. You see how the wind's applied, right? And see how it effectively, this diaphragm acts as a cantilever off of that shear element. Does everybody see that? You see the deflection. So this would be a terrible structure in the event of an earthquake because it would literally rip itself apart, right? So one of the ways you might think about this structure, and this is called the process of design, and again, we won't go into the details, but you would need to back off the length of this wall, and you would want to make this line a moment frame. So in other words, you would shorten this length, you'd decrease its stiffness, and you would increase, well, first you'd redefine this as a series of moment frames and or series of bracing elements, right? You'd brace this all up. And then you tune the stiffness of this side to this side because you want to find symmetry in the stiffness.
Will it help if for example, if these corners, if we like for the design sake, if we these two corners are big columns, like very sturdy columns, to get the structure strength to be proportional to the shear wall?
You could certainly do cantilevered columns, but in terms of stiffness, you would basically go to columns on the other side. So the shear wall would go away to effectively columns because the shear wall is so stiff because of its surface active phenomenon. Meanwhile, your column is section active. This is the point. Section active structures benefit because they deal with shear internal to the system. The only way that a column can deal with lateral force is through bending, right? And so the stiffness, you'll never achieve equivalency in the two systems, right? And so the answer would be you would probably, one, go to a moment frame, and you would decrease the length of your shear wall, right?
I have one more, the last question, sorry. For example, if the structure is like 5 to 6 floors height maximum, and same one side shear wall and everything else is column, does the substructure play any role?
So the ground, and we'll talk about this, ground does have an impact in terms of the, so different soil types respond differently to a seismic event. Remember what happens in an earthquake. There is a fault mechanism that is activated, right? That fault mechanism produces a wave. That wave effectively triggers movement in soil, right? Rock is less impacted than a very loose soil, under a seismic event. And therefore, a structure sat on a loose soil mix will experience much greater forces than a structure attached directly to rock. Okay? So soil conditions do play significant into it. Now, to the conversation of lateral system selection, the answer is, at the end of the day, you're always looking for the same phenomenon. You always are tuning your lateral elements. Shear walls will always be the stiffest system, followed by bracing, right? Things that are vectorized, followed by moment frames, followed by cantilevered columns, right? And so frankly, we would never want to do a cantilevered column in California. Why? Because if it buckled, the whole damn building pancakes you, right? You're dead. You're dead under a slab. In the case of a moment frame, we do strong column, weak beam, and we let the beam deform, and so the column never fails. Yeah. Likewise in bracing, and we talked about that. We could let the bracing fail, we could let the bracing absorb energy, but the column will never fail. Shear wall, you'll get enormous cracking, but because the thing has so much stiffness, you really only get cracking. You don't get failure. Yeah. And so the important piece to know is a cantilever column is significantly less stiff than a moment frame. A moment frame is significantly less stiff than a braced, like an X-braced or a diagonalized system. And a diagonalized system is significantly less stiff than a shear wall system. And that should make sense, right? A lot of material is going to be, really, really stiff against bending, right? Make sense, everybody on board?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do two things next week. Your assignment's going to be due. I'm going to talk about, high-rise or height active systems, and we're going to reclassify them exactly back to the 4 structural phenomena that we just talked about. Yeah, so we're just repeating the same concepts, and then we're going to motor on. I'm going to introduce the idea of long span structure, and hopefully, knock on wood, we'll introduce the next project, which will be you designing a stadium of some sort and developing a long span concept. Okay? All right.
Okay.
Party on.
So for next class,
comments? Yep.
Yeah, Greg, so for next class, we have to submit our revised 12 structure document. Okay.
Yep. If you knocked it out of the park based upon what we reviewed today, then you're submitted. Just resubmit it. If, on the other hand, you fall victim to the comments that I say you need better visuals, you didn't deal with deflection, you didn't deal with reactions, you didn't really look at what the force flow is within the structure, or you didn't write some text or commentary about describing the system, well then you're a victim. You have a week to up the ante and get your assignment knocked out. Yeah. And I did see and I did show and I did identify projects and activities that I thought were really well done. I did identify projects at least where the individual described it verbally and it was really, really good. Maybe their sketching was a little bit shy. Let's call it shy. But at the end of the day, I think I identified where you should target, how you should target it, and what you should show. If you have questions, send me stuff. Send me screenshots are best. Don't send me the whole damn package. be very specific, because then I'll fire back sooner. If I have to download a bunch of stuff and go through it, then the response time is going to be delayed. So try to be as specific as you possibly can. But if you get it to me, I'll respond. Yeah. All right. I promised that we would stay on 2 hours. I've failed consistently to this point, but at least I'm only 6 minutes long. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. I'm sure I'll talk to a few of you during the week, and we'll go from there. All right? Cool. Stay safe, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you.